Put the phone down now. I gave you a direct order.
I'm recording. I have the right to...
I don't care about your rights. You're being difficult.
Stop yelling. My kids are right here.
Then maybe you should have thought about that before acting suspicious.
Why is he mad at us?
This isn't right. This is...
The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the smell of syrup and bacon filled the late-night air. It was just past 11 on a Tuesday evening when what should have been a simple family dinner turned into a viral nightmare that would cost careers, destroy reputations, and ultimately result in one of the largest civil rights settlements in restaurant history. The security cameras captured everything that happened next, and what they recorded would shock millions of viewers and prove that sometimes justice comes with a price tag that some people simply cannot afford to pay. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. The family at the center of this storm consisted of 4 people. There was David, a 38-year-old insurance adjuster who worked the evening shift and was finally getting home. His wife Sarah, a nurse who had just finished a 12-hour shift at the local hospital. Their teenage daughter Jasmine, who was 16 and had been studying for her SATs all evening. And their 10-year-old son Michael, who had been begging his parents for pancakes all week. They were the kind of family that minded their own business, paid their bills on time, and treated everyone with respect. David coached Little League on weekends. Sarah volunteered at the food bank every other Saturday. Jasmine made honor roll every semester. Michael collected comic books and dreamed of becoming an astronaut. Nothing about them screamed trouble or drama. They were simply a hardworking family who wanted some late-night breakfast after a long day. That Tuesday had been particularly exhausting for everyone. David had dealt with 3 car accident claims, including one that required him to drive across town to inspect damage in the pouring rain. Sarah had worked a double shift because 2 nurses had called in sick, leaving the hospital understaffed. Jasmine had spent hours cramming for her chemistry test, while Michael had been bouncing off the walls with energy despite the late hour. When David finally got home around 10:30, the family decided to treat themselves to something special. Sarah suggested they all go out for a late dinner since nobody felt like cooking, and the kids had been asking about pancakes. The local Waffle House was open 24 hours, the food was affordable, and it would give everyone a chance to unwind together after their stressful day. They arrived at the restaurant just before 11. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few cars belonging to the night shift workers and a couple of customers finishing their meals. The neon sign buzzed quietly in the cool night air, casting an orange glow across the asphalt. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. Inside, the restaurant had that familiar late-night diner atmosphere. Soft music played from the speakers. The grill sizzled with someone's order. A few customers sat scattered across the booths, quietly eating their meals or scrolling through their phones. The night manager, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez, was behind the counter handling paperwork and occasionally checking on customers. The family chose a booth near the back of the restaurant, away from the front windows. They settled in comfortably, with Michael immediately grabbing the kids' menu and Sarah helping him decide between chocolate chip pancakes and waffles with strawberries. Jasmine pulled out her phone to text her friends about her chemistry test, while David looked over the regular menu, trying to decide between his usual hash browns or something different. Their server approached the table within a few minutes. She was friendly and efficient, taking their drink orders first: coffee for the adults, chocolate milk for Michael, and orange juice for Jasmine. The conversation was pleasant and normal. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The server mentioned that the cook was just starting a fresh batch of hash browns, so their food might take a few extra minutes. But nobody minded. That's when Officer Bradley Knox walked through the front door. Knox was a 12-year veteran of the local police department. He was 42 years old, stood about 6 feet tall, and carried himself with the kind of swagger that some people mistake for confidence but others recognize as arrogance. He had been patrolling the area that night, making his usual rounds through the business district when he decided to stop in for his regular coffee break. The restaurant offered free coffee to law enforcement officers, a gesture of appreciation that most cops respected and didn't abuse. Knox, however, had a different relationship with this particular establishment. He considered it part of his territory, a place where he could keep an eye on things and make sure the right kind of people were coming and going. Knox ordered his usual black coffee from the counter and took a seat at the bar facing the dining room. From this position, he could see every customer in the restaurant. He nodded to the night manager, who knew him by name, and began his routine scan of the establishment. His eyes moved from table to table, assessing each customer with the kind of scrutiny that made innocent people feel guilty. When his gaze landed on David's family, something in his expression changed. He studied them for longer than necessary, his jaw tightening slightly. He took a slow sip of his coffee and continued watching them, though he tried to make it look casual. The family was completely unaware of this attention. They were focused on their own conversation, discussing Jasmine's upcoming SAT test and Michael's latest obsession with space exploration. Sarah was telling David about a particularly difficult patient she had treated that day, while David shared a funny story about one of his insurance claims. Their food arrived about 15 minutes later. The server brought steaming plates of pancakes, waffles, eggs, and hash browns. The portions were generous, and the food looked delicious. Michael immediately dug into his chocolate chip pancakes, while Jasmine carefully cut her waffle into perfect squares. David and Sarah shared their hash browns and compared notes about their respective days. For about 20 minutes, everything was perfectly normal. The family ate their meal, laughed at Michael's jokes, and helped Jasmine review some chemistry formulas. Other customers came and went. The night manager continued her duties. Officer Knox sat at the counter, occasionally glancing in their direction but mostly focusing on his coffee and his phone. Then something shifted. Knox finished his coffee, and instead of leaving as he normally would, he stood up and walked toward their table. His hand rested casually on his belt, near his radio. His expression was stern and official, the kind of look that immediately puts people on edge even when they've done nothing wrong. David noticed him approaching first and instinctively straightened up in his seat. Sarah looked up from her conversation with Jasmine and felt an immediate sense of unease. The kids continued eating, oblivious to the tension that was suddenly filling the air around their table. Knox stopped directly beside their booth and looked down at the family with an expression that was anything but friendly. He didn't introduce himself politely or explain why he was approaching them. Instead, he simply stood there, creating an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on forever. David was the first to speak, asking politely if there was something the officer needed. His voice was calm and respectful, the tone of someone who understood that cooperation was always the best policy when dealing with law enforcement. He had taught his children to always be polite to police officers, to follow instructions, and to never give anyone a reason to escalate a situation. Knox's response was cold and direct. He said he had received reports about suspicious activity in the restaurant and needed to verify some information. This was the first lie of the evening, though the family had no way of knowing it. No reports had been made, no suspicious activity had occurred. Knox was operating purely on his own initiative, motivated by reasons that would become clear as the situation unfolded. Sarah asked what kind of suspicious activity he was referring to, her nursing training making her naturally curious about details and specifics. Knox ignored her question and instead asked David for identification. When David asked why identification was necessary for eating dinner in a restaurant, Knox's tone became noticeably more aggressive. The other customers in the restaurant began to notice the interaction. Conversations grew quieter as people turned their attention toward the booth, where a police officer was questioning a family who appeared to be doing nothing more than enjoying their meal. The night manager, Lisa, looked up from her paperwork and began paying closer attention to what was happening in her restaurant. Knox demanded to see identification from all 4 family members, including the children. This request was both unusual and legally questionable, but David decided it was easier to comply than to argue. He pulled out his driver's license while Sarah retrieved hers from her purse. Jasmine had a student ID, and Michael had nothing, being only 10 years old. Knox examined each ID carefully, taking much longer than necessary to review documents that contained straightforward information. He asked where they lived, where they worked, and what they were doing in the restaurant so late at night. Each question felt more invasive than the last, and the family began to realize that this was not a routine interaction. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you were being treated unfairly but weren't sure what to do about it? Type yes in the comments if you have. Other diners were now openly staring at the situation unfolding before them. Some looked sympathetic while others appeared uncomfortable and uncertain about whether they should intervene or mind their own business. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely changed from peaceful and relaxed to tense and charged with an energy that everyone could feel. Knox's questions became increasingly personal and intrusive. He asked about their income, their criminal history, and whether they had ever been arrested. When David pointed out that these questions seemed inappropriate for a family simply having dinner, Knox's demeanor became openly hostile. That's when the night manager decided she had seen enough. Lisa Rodriguez had been managing the night shift at this Waffle House for 8 years. She had seen drunk customers, belligerent teenagers, and difficult situations of every kind. But what she was witnessing at that booth made her stomach turn. She knew Officer Knox from his regular visits, and she had always found him to be professional, if somewhat cold. This behavior was completely different from anything she had observed before. Lisa walked over to the table, her manager's badge clearly visible on her uniform. She approached with a friendly smile and asked if everything was okay with their meal. Her voice was warm and welcoming, but her eyes were sharp and observant. She was assessing the situation like the experienced professional she was. Knox turned toward her with obvious irritation. He told her this was police business and she should return to her duties behind the counter. Lisa didn't back down. She calmly explained that, as the manager on duty, she was responsible for ensuring all customers felt comfortable and safe in her establishment. Her tone remained respectful but firm. David looked at Lisa with gratitude. Here was someone who seemed to understand that something was wrong with this situation. Sarah reached over and gently squeezed her husband's hand under the table, a silent gesture of support and solidarity. The children continued to eat their food, though they were clearly becoming more aware that something unusual was happening. Knox stepped closer to Lisa, invading her personal space in the same way he had done to the family. He told her that he was conducting an investigation and any interference could result in charges against her and the restaurant. Lisa had dealt with difficult customers and demanding situations throughout her career, but she had never been threatened by a police officer for simply doing her job. The tension in the restaurant was now palpable. Every customer was watching the interaction unfold. Some had their phones out, though they weren't yet recording. Others whispered quietly to their companions. The cook in the back could sense something was wrong and kept glancing through the service window to see what was happening. Lisa asked Knox to step aside so she could speak with him privately. She suggested they move away from the dining area to discuss whatever concerns he might have. Knox refused. He said everything he needed to say could be said right here in front of everyone. His voice was getting louder and more aggressive with each exchange. That's when David made a decision that would prove to be crucial. He pulled out his phone and started recording. He didn't hide what he was doing. He held the device openly, making sure the camera captured both Knox and the surrounding area. The moment that phone came out, everything escalated dramatically. Knox immediately ordered David to put the phone away. David calmly explained that he had the right to record a public official performing their duties in a public place. Knox stepped even closer, his hand moving toward his weapon. He repeated his order, this time with unmistakable menace in his voice. Sarah instinctively moved to shield her children, positioning herself between them and the increasingly agitated officer. Jasmine looked frightened, while Michael seemed confused about why the policeman was being so mean to his family. Other customers began pulling out their own phones, sensing that they might be witnessing something that needed to be documented. Lisa stepped forward again, this time more assertively. She told Knox that the family was not bothering anyone and had every right to eat their meal in peace. She said that if he had legitimate police business to conduct, he should do it outside her restaurant. Knox turned his anger toward her, accusing her of interfering with a police investigation. The situation was spiraling out of control rapidly. What had started as a family dinner was turning into a confrontation that none of them had wanted or provoked. David kept his phone steady, continuing to record while trying to remain calm for his children's sake. Sarah was fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Knox reached for David's arm, apparently intending to physically stop him from recording. David pulled away and clearly stated that he did not consent to being touched. He asked what crime he was being accused of and on what legal grounds he was being detained. Knox couldn't provide a coherent answer to either question. Lisa made a decision that would change everything. She walked back to the counter and picked up the restaurant's phone. Knox demanded to know what she was doing. Lisa looked him straight in the eye and said she was calling the police department to request a supervisor. Knox's face went pale. The other customers in the restaurant realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Several were now openly recording with their phones. One elderly man stood up and loudly stated that he was a witness to everything that was happening. A young woman called out that the family had done nothing wrong and should be left alone. Knox found himself in a situation he had not anticipated. He had expected the family to be intimidated into compliance. He had expected other customers to mind their own business. He had expected the restaurant staff to defer to his authority. Instead, he was facing a room full of people who were documenting his behavior and calling him out for his actions. Sarah spoke up for the first time since the confrontation began. Her voice was steady despite her fear. She said her family had come to the restaurant to eat dinner and had done nothing to justify this harassment. She pointed out that they had cooperated with every request and answered every question. She asked why they were being treated like criminals. Knox's response revealed the ugly truth behind his behavior. He said that people like them didn't belong in nice establishments like this one. He said their kind brought trouble wherever they went and that he was just trying to keep the peace. The words hung in the air like poison, making his motivations crystal clear to everyone present. The restaurant fell silent, except for the sound of multiple phones recording. Every person in that building now understood exactly what they were witnessing. This wasn't about suspicious activity or police business. This was about a racist officer who couldn't stand seeing a successful black family enjoying a meal in what he considered his territory. Lisa's call to the police department was answered quickly. She explained that she had an officer in her restaurant who was harassing customers without justification and creating a disturbance. The dispatcher asked for Knox's badge number, which Lisa requested from him directly. Knox initially refused to provide it, claiming he didn't have to identify himself to civilian restaurant staff. David, still recording, calmly stated Knox's badge number aloud. He had noticed it earlier when the officer first approached their table. Knox spun around, furious that his identity was being broadcast. He accused David of being a troublemaker and suggested that his attitude was exactly why he had drawn police attention in the first place. The supervisor who took Lisa's call was Lieutenant Patricia Johnson, a 20-year veteran who had dealt with more than her share of problematic officers. When she heard Knox's badge number, she immediately recognized it. Knox had been the subject of multiple complaints over the past 2 years, all involving interactions with minority citizens. None of the complaints had resulted in serious discipline, but they had created a pattern that Johnson had been monitoring. Johnson told the dispatcher she would respond personally to the restaurant. She also requested that additional units be sent to maintain order and ensure the situation didn't escalate further. Within minutes, 3 police cars were heading toward the Waffle House, their occupants unaware that they were about to witness a career-ending moment caught on multiple cameras. Back in the restaurant, Knox was becoming increasingly desperate. He could see the situation slipping away from him. The family remained calm and cooperative despite his aggression. The restaurant manager was standing firm in support of her customers. Other diners were openly criticizing his behavior. Everything he had expected to go his way was falling apart. Michael, who had been quietly eating his pancakes throughout most of the confrontation, finally spoke up. In the innocent voice of a 10-year-old, he asked his father why the policeman was being so mean to them. David knelt down to his son's eye level and gently explained that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and that everything would be okay. That simple exchange, captured on video, would later become one of the most powerful moments in the footage that would soon be seen by millions. A child's confusion about adult prejudice, a father's attempt to maintain dignity under pressure, and a family's quiet strength in the face of injustice, all condensed into a few heartbreaking seconds. Knox overheard Michael's question and David's response. Something about the child's innocence seemed to break through his anger for just a moment. He looked around the restaurant and seemed to realize for the first time how many people were watching him, how many cameras were recording his every word and action. But instead of backing down or apologizing, Knox doubled down on his position. He announced to the entire restaurant that he was a police officer doing his job and that anyone who didn't like it could file a complaint. He said he had every right to question suspicious individuals and that the family's reaction to his questions only confirmed his suspicions about them. Lisa had heard enough. She walked directly up to Knox and told him that his behavior was completely unacceptable and that he needed to leave her restaurant immediately. She said that the family was welcome to stay and finish their meal in peace, but that he was no longer welcome on the premises. Knox stared at her in disbelief, apparently shocked that a restaurant manager would dare to tell a police officer to leave. The sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder by the minute. Knox's backup was arriving, but so was his supervisor. The next few minutes would determine whether this situation would be quietly resolved or explode into something much bigger. David continued recording, his phone battery showing a healthy charge that would allow him to document whatever happened next. Sarah kept her children close, whispering reassurances that everything would work out fine. Lisa stood her ground behind the counter, ready to explain the situation to whoever walked through that door first. None of them could have predicted that within 48 hours, the video David was recording would have over 3 million views. Within a week, it would spark national conversations about racial profiling, police accountability, and the rights of private businesses to protect their customers. Within 6 months, it would result in one of the largest civil rights settlements in restaurant industry history. But for now, they simply waited as the sirens grew louder and the fluorescent lights continued to hum overhead, casting their harsh glow over a scene that would change all their lives forever. Lives forever. The first police cruiser to arrive belonged to Officer James Mitchell, a 5-year veteran who had worked with Knox on several occasions. Mitchell walked through the front door, expecting to assist with a routine disturbance call. But the scene that greeted him was unlike anything he had encountered before. The restaurant was completely silent, except for the hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional beep from the kitchen equipment. Every customer was staring at the booth in the back where Knox stood over a black family who appeared to be simply trying to finish their dinner. Multiple phones were pointed in their direction, recording every moment. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mitchell approached Knox with confusion written across his face. He asked what the situation was and why so many civilians were recording. Knox tried to explain that he was investigating suspicious behavior, but his words came out jumbled and defensive. Mitchell looked around the restaurant again, trying to identify what could possibly be suspicious about a family eating pancakes and waffles. Lisa immediately walked over to Officer Mitchell and introduced herself as the night manager. She calmly explained that Knox had been harassing a family who had done nothing wrong, that she had asked him to leave, and that she wanted the family to be able to finish their meal in peace. Her tone was professional and measured, the voice of someone who dealt with difficult situations regularly. Mitchell asked to speak with Knox privately, suggesting they step outside. Knox refused, saying everything was under control and that Mitchell should focus on managing the crowd of onlookers. But Mitchell wasn't buying it. He had enough experience to recognize when a situation had gone sideways, and this one was clearly off the rails. David continued recording, making sure to capture both officers clearly. He had switched his phone to video mode early in the confrontation and had been careful to keep the camera steady despite his nervousness. The timestamp on his phone showed that the incident had been going on for nearly 40 minutes, though it felt like hours to everyone involved. Sarah noticed that Jasmine was starting to shake slightly. The teenager had been trying to stay strong throughout the ordeal, but the presence of multiple police officers was making her anxiety worse. Sarah gently rubbed her daughter's back and whispered that they would be going home soon. Michael had finished his pancakes and was now coloring on the kids' menu with the crayons the restaurant provided. The second police car arrived just as Mitchell was trying to convince Knox to step outside. Officer Rebecca Torres had been patrolling a different sector when she heard the call come over the radio. She knew Knox by reputation and that reputation wasn't entirely positive. Torres had heard whispers about his interactions with minority citizens, though nothing had ever been officially documented. Torres entered the restaurant and immediately assessed the situation. She saw the family in the booth, clearly uncomfortable but trying to remain calm. She saw Knox, agitated and defensive, standing over them like he was interrogating suspects. She saw the manager, professional but obviously frustrated. And she saw the other customers, all of whom appeared to be documenting everything with their phones. Without saying a word to Knox, Torres walked directly to the family's table. She introduced herself politely and asked if everyone was okay. David looked up at her with cautious relief. Here was an officer who seemed to understand that something was wrong with this picture. Sarah nodded and said they were fine but confused about why they were being questioned. Torres asked David to explain what had happened from the beginning. David, still holding his phone to record, gave a clear and concise account of the evening's events. He explained that they had come to the restaurant for a late dinner after long workdays. He described Knox's approach to their table, the invasive questions, and the increasingly aggressive behavior. Knox interrupted David's explanation, claiming that the family was giving a biased account and that Torres should focus on the fact that they were being uncooperative with a police investigation. Torres looked at Knox with barely concealed irritation. She asked him what specific crime he was investigating and what evidence he had observed to justify questioning the family. Knox's response was rambling and incoherent. He mentioned suspicious behavior without being able to describe what that behavior was. He talked about maintaining order in the community without explaining what disorder he was addressing. He referenced his experience and instincts without providing any concrete justification for his actions. Torres had heard enough. She politely but firmly told Knox that she was taking over the situation and that he should return to his patrol car. Knox started to protest, but Torres cut him off. She said that as the senior officer on scene, she was making the decision to de-escalate the situation and allow the family to finish their meal in peace. That's when the third police car arrived, and everything changed. Lieutenant Samuel Rodriguez stepped out of the vehicle with the bearing of someone who had seen it all during his 18 years on the force. Rodriguez had been Knox's supervisor for the past 3 years and had been fielding complaints about him with increasing frequency. When the dispatcher mentioned Knox's badge number in connection with a restaurant disturbance, Rodriguez knew he needed to respond personally. Rodriguez entered the Waffle House and immediately took control of the scene. He spoke briefly with Torres, who gave him a quick summary of what she had observed. He nodded to Mitchell, who appeared relieved that someone with more authority had arrived. Then he turned his attention to Knox. The conversation between Rodriguez and Knox was brief and one-sided. Rodriguez asked Knox to explain his actions, and Knox launched into the same rambling justification he had given Torres. Rodriguez listened for about 30 seconds before holding up his hand to stop Knox mid-sentence. Rodriguez then did something that surprised everyone in the restaurant. He walked over to David's table and apologized on behalf of the police department. He said that what had happened to their family was unacceptable and that there would be consequences for the officer responsible. He assured them that they were free to finish their meal and that no further police action would be taken. David lowered his phone for the first time in over an hour. Sarah felt tears of relief welling up in her eyes. Jasmine looked around the restaurant and noticed that other customers were smiling and nodding approvingly. Michael asked if they could order dessert now that the mean policeman was gone. Rodriguez escorted Knox out of the restaurant, but their conversation in the parking lot was loud enough for people near the windows to hear. Rodriguez was clearly angry, though he kept his voice professional. Knox was arguing and gesturing wildly, apparently unable to accept that he had done anything wrong. Lisa approached the family's table with a warm smile and asked if there was anything else she could bring them. She also mentioned that their meal would be completely complimentary and that she hoped they would consider returning when they could enjoy their food without interruption. David thanked her profusely, praising her courage in standing up to Knox when it would have been easier to stay out of the situation. Other customers began approaching the table to offer their support and express their disgust at what they had witnessed. An elderly couple mentioned that they had never seen anything like it in all their years. A young man said he had recorded the entire incident and would be happy to provide his footage if needed. A woman with 2 small children apologized on behalf of all the decent people in the community. Torres and Mitchell remained in the restaurant for another 20 minutes, taking statements from witnesses and ensuring that the family felt safe. Torres gave David her business card and encouraged him to file a formal complaint with the department's Internal Affairs Division. She also mentioned that the incident would be thoroughly investigated and that Knox would face appropriate discipline. Outside in the parking lot, Rodriguez was having the most difficult conversation of Knox's career. He informed Knox that he was being suspended immediately, pending a full investigation into his conduct. Knox's police powers were being revoked, his weapon and badge were being confiscated, and he was being ordered to report to Internal Affairs first thing in the morning. Knox's reaction to this news was exactly what Rodriguez expected. He became angry and defensive, claiming that he was being railroaded for doing his job. He accused Rodriguez of bowing to political pressure and abandoning his officers when they needed support. Rodriguez listened to the tirade without expression, then simply repeated that Knox was suspended and needed to leave the scene immediately. The family finally finished their meal around 1 in the morning. Michael had indeed ordered dessert, chocolate ice cream that he shared with his sister. David and Sarah had coffee and tried to process what had just happened to them. They discussed whether they should pursue any legal action or simply try to put the incident behind them. Jasmine, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally spoke up. She said she wanted to make sure Knox couldn't do the same thing to another family. She pointed out that if he had treated them this way, he had probably treated others the same way or worse. Her parents were struck by their daughter's maturity and sense of justice. As they prepared to leave, Lisa came over one final time to check on them. She handed David a business card for a civil rights attorney she had looked up on her phone. She said she wasn't sure if they were interested in pursuing legal action, but she wanted them to have options. She also mentioned that the restaurant's security cameras had recorded the entire incident and that the footage would be preserved. David uploaded his video to social media before the family even made it home. He didn't expect it to get much attention. He simply wanted to document what had happened in case they needed the evidence later. He wrote a brief caption explaining that his family had been harassed while trying to eat dinner and that he hoped sharing their experience would prevent it from happening to others. By the time the family woke up the next morning, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times. By noon, it was approaching 200,000 views. Local news stations had picked up the story and were calling David's phone requesting interviews. The restaurant's corporate headquarters had issued a statement praising Lisa's handling of the situation and condemning any form of discrimination. Knox, meanwhile, was sitting in the Internal Affairs office trying to explain his actions to investigators who had already watched David's video multiple times. The footage was clear and damning. There was no way to spin his behavior as appropriate or professional. His union representative advised him to remain silent, but Knox insisted on defending himself. The investigation concluded within 2 weeks. Knox was terminated from the police department and lost his pension benefits. The family's civil rights lawsuit resulted in a $2.1 million settlement, with funds going toward police bias training programs. Lisa was promoted to regional manager for her courageous stand. Sometimes standing up to injustice comes with a price, but staying silent costs even more. This case was brutal, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.